New York State officials, led by Governor Kathy Hochul, are actively coordinating with Wall Street executives to forestall a possible federal surge of law enforcement or a deployment of the National Guard in New York City, a move they argue would severely damage the city's economy and well-being. This coordinated strategy is modeled after a playbook successfully used by San Francisco. In that case, tech and business leaders lobbied then-President Trump, emphasizing that a Guard deployment would not only hurt local business, but also have broader negative economic ripples. Jackie Bray, New York's Homeland Security and Emergency Services Director, is spearheading the effort, gathering data, consulting civic and business leaders, and building a narrative that counters any federal rationale for intervention. On one level, this is a preventive measure. There's no immediate threat, according to the report, but the political stakes are high. The business community is seen as a key channel to influence decision-making at the federal level. To fully understand the significance of this effort, it's important to examine several interlocking dynamics: political, economic, social, and historical. The article notes that tensions have escalated due to the election of Zohran Mamdani, a Democratic socialist, as the next mayor of New York City. Mamdani has vowed to make New York the strongest sanctuary city in the U.S., pledging to limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement and hire 200 lawyers to defend against what he describes as presidential policy abuses. Meanwhile, Trump has, in past rhetoric, threatened to deploy the National Guard to New York City in response to its sanctuary status and other policy positions. This makes New York a potential flashpoint for federal-state conflict. Local leaders are preemptively organizing to resist, not just because of security concerns, but because of what a deployment would symbolically represent: economic risks and business advocacy. The business community, including heavyweights like J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and BlackRock, is taking a major role here. The argument being made to the White House is not just about local crime or policing. Instead, it's a warning about economic fallout. Guard deployments would undermine business confidence, scare off investment, and destabilize markets tied to New York's financial infrastructure. This is not just a political argument. State officials are collecting data on negative economic impacts from other cities that faced similar federal interventions and are using it to build their case. By involving Wall Street, the state is signaling that this isn't just a blue city versus federal government fight. It's a business fight with national economic implications, civil leadership, and local resistance. New York's push is not purely top-down. There's broad civic and political buy-in. Jackie Bray has held one-on-one meetings with CEOs and civic leaders, building a coalition that transcends simple partisan politics. The New York City Council, along with faith leaders, has publicly opposed the deployment of the National Guard. They argue that such a move would undermine public safety and erode trust in local institutions. These leaders frame the potential deployment as more than a security issue. It's about autonomy, civil liberties, and protecting immigrant communities. Key stakeholders and their motivations. Let's break down who's involved and why they might have a vested interest in resisting a federal Guard deployment and what risks they see. 1. State government. Governor Hochul, Homeland Security Director Jackie Bray, want to protect New York's sovereignty and prevent a perceived federal overreach. Are concerned about the economic disruption, especially to immigrant communities and small businesses, that could be caused by a militarized presence. Are building a data-driven case to present to the federal government, framing the issue as not only political but economic. 2. Wall Street business leaders. Fear negative economic consequences. A militarized city could undermine market confidence, disrupt business operations, and scare off investment. Want to maintain New York's image as stable and business-friendly. Have the leverage to influence national policy by framing the issue as materially important to the broader economy, not just a local policy squabble. Local political leaders, Mamdani, city council, faith leaders, see this as a fight over civil rights, especially for immigrant communities. oppose what they view as an interventionist, heavy-handed federal approach, believe that public safety should come from community-based solutions, trust in local institutions, not via a military-style deployment. 4. Law enforcement, NYPD. Some voices strongly resist Guard deployment. For example, NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch has expressed being revolted by the idea of militarizing city streets. She argues that federal troops are not suited for local policing, and that the NYPD can handle crime without introducing additional chaos. This is significant. Even within law enforcement, there's resistance to federal involvement, which strengthens the case for local control. Risks, challenges, and counter-arguments. While New York officials and business leaders are mounting a coordinated defense, there are significant challenges and risks to this strategy, as well as counter-arguments from the federal side. Risks for New York. 1. Public perception and political risk. If the federal government frames resistance as obstruction or defiance, New York officials could gain a reputation for putting politics over public safety. Some residents may feel that resistance to Guard deployment compromises their safety, especially if crime spikes or fear of unrest rises. The strategy relies heavily on business and elite buy-in. If public sentiment diverges, there may be backlash against perceived cozy relationships between Wall Street and elected leaders. 2. Economic uncertainty. While they warn of economic harm from a Guard deployment, the very act of publicly warning about it could spook investors or businesses that worry about instability. If the federal government calls their bluff and sends troops anyway, New York might face disruption anyway, and the business coalition could fracture under real stress. 3. Legal and constitutional challenges. The state's arguments may rely on soft power, economics, public relations, more than legal guarantees. If the federal government decides to intervene on security grounds, New York's options may be limited. Even with data and advocacy, persuading the executive branch, or Congress, not to deploy may not be enough if national security is invoked. There's a risk that this sets a precedent. If New York wins this round, other cities may replicate the model, but if they lose, it could embolden future federal interventions. 4. Operational complexity. Coordinating business leaders, civic organizations, and state agencies is complex. Sustaining a unified message over time is a major challenge. The state must gather and present credible data on economic harm. If their modeling or arguments are weak, the federal government may dismiss them. The longer this standoff drags on, the more it becomes a politicized spectacle, which could escalate tensions. Counter-arguments from the federal side. 1. National security, public safety justification. The federal government could argue that a Guard deployment is necessary for law enforcement or immigration control, especially if they frame New York as a hotspot or test case. They may also argue that federal resources are needed to backstop local agencies, particularly in immigrant-rich neighborhoods or areas with high tension. 2. Political leverage. Washington may view a deployment as a way to exert pressure on local leadership or send a political message, regardless of the economic or civic objections. The administration could bypass economic arguments by framing the decision in terms of national interest or law and order. 3. Precedent. If other cities have accepted Guard deployments, the federal government may argue it has a roadmap and legal basis. They could cite prior deployments or threats as justification for a broader strategy. 4. Negotiation and compromise. The federal government may use New York's resistance as a bargaining chip, offer limited deployments, or condition the deployment on certain terms negotiated with state or city officials. They might also propose alternative forms of support, federal law enforcement, funding, task forces that are less militarized, possible scenarios and strategic outcomes. Given the tensions, what could happen next? Here are a few plausible scenarios and their implications. Scenario 1. New York wins. No Guard deployment. Business and state advocacy works. The combined lobbying and economic arguments persuade the federal government to back off. Public relations victory. New York demonstrates that business, civic, and political leaders can coordinate to resist federal intervention, boosting morale and confidence in local control. Precedent set. This sets a model for other cities to resist militarization via economic and civic pressure. Stability maintained without Guard deployment. New York avoids the disruption, cost, and symbolic blow that a militarized presence would bring. Risks in this scenario. The threat may continue to linger. If the political winds shift, New York may have to re-raise the same defenses. Also, the business leaders who supported this could now be on edge, not wanting any counterattack or reprisal. Scenario 2. Compromise. Limited federal involvement. Negotiated terms. The federal government agrees to a more limited or conditional deployment, perhaps with constraints, where Guard can operate. For what purposes, under what oversight? Joint task forces. Instead of a pure military-style deployment, there may be mixed law enforcement partnerships, some federal agents, but not a full Guard wave. Economic safeguards. New York negotiates economic guarantees or assurances to mitigate business risk, e.g., tax breaks or federal economic commitments. Public messaging. Both sides spin the outcome. New York can say it protected its sovereignty, while Washington can claim it maintained order. Risks. Compromise may be unstable. If Guard deployment comes in but is unpopular, New York could face strong public backlash. Also, the restrictions might be temporary or easily reversed later. Scenario 3. Federal deployment goes ahead. Guard surge. Despite resistance, the federal government deploys the National Guard to New York City, or parts of it. Economic impact. Business community fears come true. Potential disruption, reduced investment, and reputational damage. Civic unrest. Local leaders, immigrant communities, and city institutions push back, possibly leading to protests or legal challenges. Political fallout could become a major national controversy, fueling debates about federalism, civil rights, and the role of the military in domestic settings. Risks. This could damage New York's social fabric, erode trust in institutions, and cause long-term economic and political harm. It could also escalate into a broader national precedent for militarizing blue cities. Broader implications. This story is more than just a New York political maneuver. If it plays out in any of the above ways, it could have ripple effects on national politics, federal-state relations, and how business engages with policymaking. 1. Federalism and power balance. This case could become a landmark in the struggle between state-local sovereignty and federal authority. If New York prevails, it strengthens the idea that states can resist certain kinds of federal law enforcement interventions, especially when backed by economic power. 2. Business as political actor. Wall Street's involvement underscores how private sector actors are increasingly directly influencing high-stakes policy debates beyond traditional lobbying. The business community is not just concerned with taxes or regulations. It's also signaling that security overreach threatens profitability and stability. 3. Immigration and sanctuary city politics. Since Mamdani's sanctuary policies are part of the backdrop, this could intensify debates over immigration enforcement. A Guard deployment framed as an immigration crackdown could galvanize immigrant rights advocates and city allies. 4. Militarization of urban spaces. More broadly, this raises fundamental questions. When is it appropriate for the military or National Guard to operate in U.S. cities? What limits should there be? The national conversation about domestic militarization could be re-energized, particularly in the context of law enforcement, protests, and urban governance. 5. Precedent for other cities. If New York successfully resists, other major cities might adopt a similar strategy, combining business, civic, and political resistance. Conversely, if the federal government prevails, it could open the door for more aggressive use of Guard deployments in politically contentious cities. Conclusion. The push by New York state officials and Wall Street leaders to keep the National Guard out of New York City is a high-stakes, multidimensional political gambit. It's not just about crime or security. It's about sovereignty, economics, civil rights, and the very nature of federal power.